Hello, you are listening to The Wellness Project with Des. I'm your host, Desiree, a mental health therapist and holistic wellness coach. On my podcast, I interview experts in the field of mental health and wellness, as well as those who share their firsthand accounts of their mental health journeys. These interviews will give you many tips, tools, and strategies to improve your mental health, as well as give you hope, support, encouragement, and inspiration on your own personal mental health and wellness journey. Thanks so much for being here. I would greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to leave me a review on iTunes and leave the podcast 5 stars on Spotify. It really helps the podcast to grow, which in turn helps me to keep bringing on amazing guests and spreading mental health and wellness education and support. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey towards holistic well-being, unlocking the full potential of your mind, body, and spirit? If so, I'm thrilled to invite you to my program, the Holistic Wellness Transformation Coaching Program. My one-to-one coaching program is a comprehensive and individualized approach to help you improve your overall well-being. As a holistic wellness coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey to attain balance and harmony in all areas of your life. With personalized coaching sessions, I'll offer guidance and support throughout your wellness journey. Starting with a thorough holistic assessment. We'll dive into your past, habits, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and patterns that may be holding you back and no longer serving you. This assessment forms the foundation for your customized wellness plan. Together, we'll explore the 8 foundational elements of wellness to ensure you feel balanced and aligned with your goals and your values. This program goes beyond the surface, providing you with mental and emotional support. I will help you to manage stress, anxiety, and other challenges such as perfectionism and people-pleasing, offering techniques and strategies to enhance your resilience and your skills. The benefits of this program cannot be overstated. I'll be there every step of the way to support you in achieving balance and harmony in your life, manage stress, and improve your emotional well-being. Nurture healthy connections, create lasting, healthy habits, achieve your goals, and gain confidence in your ability to transform your life. Join me on this journey to holistic wellness. You could go to my website to check out my various packages, and you could go to my Calendly link found in the show notes to schedule a free 30-minute consultation call where we will go over the 8 core areas of wellness, as well as your goals and your dream life. Reach out and let's get started on your wellness journey so you can finally live the life you want. Hey there, I'm your host Des, and you are listening to episode number 183, and today we are talking about such an important topic, such an important topic. We are talking all about money. We're talking about living paycheck to paycheck, living in poverty, financial literacy, how this all ties in to our mental health. Because, as I often say, finances are one of the 8 pillars of wellness and self-care. Improving my financial well-being and my financial situation is something I've grown very passionate about over the last few years, something I've been learning a lot about. It's something I've been studying. It's something that I've grown to be really interested in. I've been listening to different podcasts. I've been reading books. I've been taking free classes online. I've been listening to audiobooks. And I've been watching a lot of videos. I watch a lot of financial advisors on TikTok. It was actually through all of this information and specifically these videos on TikTok that led me to opening my own Roth IRA and a brokerage account through Vanguard. I had always had whatever retirement plan my employment had offered. I have always contributed to that. Maybe not as much as I should have been. I didn't know then, but now I know you're supposed to be contributing about 10 to 15% of your pay. I don't know that I was doing that consistently over my career, but I know that I was contributing to my retirement through my employment and that I was trying to meet the match. But since then, I've learned so much, simply, like I said, by reading, listening to audiobooks, podcasts, watching videos. And I wish that I knew back then what I know now. But we don't know what we don't know. And as they say, maybe yesterday was the best time to start, but the next best time is today. On today's podcast, I am speaking with Aaliyah Kissick. Aaliyah went to college for business, but while in her program, she learned that she was passionate about the financial aspect and became really passionate about helping others to better their financial situations. She's passionate about addressing the adult's education gap when it comes to finances, and this led her to kickstarting her own financial literacy platform, and it's her goal to make financial education accessible to everyone. This episode is just packed full of valuable information. Aaliyah talks with us about things like behavioral economics, poverty traps, stagflation, and she goes into the 4 pillars of financial literacy that we should all know. We don't talk about money nearly as much as we should, and maybe we complain about money, and maybe we're frustrated with money and living paycheck to paycheck, but there's not enough conversations about what to do, how to better your financial situation, financial literacy, financial education. That's one of the reasons I love TikTok so much, is that this information is so easily accessible. I follow so many different financial advisors. It's just great education. We are living in a time where you can open your computer or your phone and learn anything in the world you want to learn. It's easier now than ever to close those gaps because I didn't learn this kind of stuff in school. I didn't learn in high school. I didn't learn in college. I made a ton of mistakes, but now I have the information very easily accessible, and I'm trying to better my situation. We are up against a lot. As we talk about in this conversation, all these different aspects of our lives are going up, like gas, groceries, rent, mortgages, all these different things are going up, except for our pay. But I believe that there's always something you can do, at least a little something, to try to better your financial future. And Aaliyah is going to give us so much information, so many great tips, so I really hope that you stick around because you're going to learn a lot. This is an important topic, so I'm really glad that Aaliyah is here today to educate us and to help us better our financial futures. Help me welcome Aaliyah. All right, everyone. I am here with Aaliyah Kissick. Aaliyah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. So before we dive into our conversation that I'm so looking forward to, I would love if you could share your story with us, share your journey, how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. So, my professional journey starts at the ripe age of 11. I started in the talent industry as a model and actress. And that introduced me to a whole new world of money and all of that fun stuff. I didn't realize what I was learning until a few years later, but I did have to get a work permit and I was employed for all intents and purposes at a very young age. It was a great opportunity for me to get my foot in the door. And then that allowed me to start my first business at 17, which that's an opportunity that most people don't have. And I really think that my experience in the talent industry really allows me to have that, right? So I was already working adjacent to fashion experts, and I decided that rather than making X amount of dollars, which was a percentage of whatever fashion company I was working with commercially was getting, I decided that I was going to take 100% of the profits from modeling by creating my own clothing store. And that was kind of the mentality that I had whenever I wanted to start my own business. It was a resale clothing store called AK Boutique. And so, one of the things that I really like emphasizing is the fact that I did not come from a family of business owners. I was actually adopted from foster care into a single parent household, and she was a nurse. I had no idea how to get started. All I knew is that I wanted to make more money from my modeling jobs. I had an idea for a business, and I just bootstrapped my way up from the absolute ground. Now, when I say ground, I mean garage operation, my mom's garage between my junior and senior year of high school. And it was an absolutely crazy experience. Years later, I start college. I am getting my degree in business and realize that the financial side is actually something that I'm really passionate about. I love learning about it, and I also love helping people. So I went on to get my bachelor's degree, and my official degree is agricultural and consumer economics with a focus in financial planning. Now, college is really when I started to learn more and think critically about other people's situation, right? Because whenever we're a teenager, sometimes we live in our own little bubble where we think we are the center of the world. That's actually a very normal developmental process. So I realized, coming from foster care, that maybe not everyone had the same level of opportunity to do what I did. Really, what allowed me to do what I did in the first place was online education, right? I was Google searching my way through running my business, and that started the process that I was able to get in contact with business owners in the area, find my mentors, find the right degree program. Because of that, I really wanted to give the same opportunities to people who may not have had the same background as me. So, for example, some foster children do not get adopted, so they don't have that stable environment. How do you reach these people? And online education is the best way to do that. I kickstarted this financial literacy platform by competing for Miss United States as Miss Illinois United States 2023. That gave me a national platform for me to talk about this type of stuff, for me to drive attention to it in this attention economy that everyone is everywhere in. And from there, I started the Financial Literacy Diaries. And my top goal is to make financial education accessible by providing as much free content as possible.
Oh, incredible. I love this so much. This is so needed, but not only so needed and so important, but so inspiring that you're using your platform to help other people. So I'm curious, you talked about this a little bit, but how has your experience in foster care shaped your perspective on financial literacy and poverty?
I really think that my experience in foster care is not a typical experience in foster care. And there's really no such thing as a typical experience. As I got older and I started to see what some of the other outcomes for people in foster care or from backgrounds like mine who didn't make it into foster care, I realized that a lot of where we end up in life can come from what we've learned in the process. And when we're minors, when we're under the age of 18, we don't really have much control over our environment and what we have the opportunity to learn. That is leading into what I see as the adult education gap, right? Where financial literacy is not mandated in all schools federally. The state of Illinois, where I am originally from, has passed a mandate, but not every state has that, right? So some people are not learning financial literacy at school. And then some people who come from foster care who maybe are going from home to home or maybe weren't adopted into a household that talks about money or feels like they're part of the family or feels comfortable enough to talk to their parents about that, they are not getting that education at home either. And so I think that what is really important to drive home, especially to people who may not have experienced anything like foster care or poverty, which are very different things, but they do tend to correlate with one another, is that we don't come from the same backgrounds. We can't assume we come from the same backgrounds. And education is one of the few ways that we can actually equalize knowledge, given the fact that we come from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I fully agree with this. I agree with everything you're saying because I work in a middle school and high school as a school social worker, and it is absolutely astounding to me that financial literacy is not taught in schools. It makes no sense. So I do talk with the kids about, basic things like savings accounts, like high yield savings, investments, things like that, debit cards and credit cards. Like they literally have no idea that they don't know this information. They don't know the difference between even a debit card, a credit card, and it sets people up for failure. I mean, it sets people up for debt. I don't understand how it's not mandated federally. It doesn't make sense to me. It's so important. And so I work with in my private practice and my coaching practice, I work with adults. One of the foundations I think of wellness is finances. There is financial wellness and financial self-care. And it's amazing that even adults that I work with don't have this foundation of financial literacy. So, like you said, there's a huge, huge gap.
Exactly. And I think that a big part of this comes from where we've been in the last 30 years. I'm not even 30 years old yet, but I really want to jump into a little bit of financial history. As everyone is aware, technology is developing rapidly. And whenever technology develops rapidly, so does the way that we think about currency and the way that we use currency. If you go back 30 years ago, which is 1994, that sounds crazy. I think of 30 years ago, I feel like we're in 1970, but 1994 was 30 years ago. In 1994, this was around the time that credit cards were being marketed as a mass use sort of thing. So before the 90s, credit cards were associated with business executives. You had people who spent a lot of money, and having a credit card was something that was more of a status symbol, and it's something that the average person didn't even think about. They had their checks that they would use, or they would use cash. The phrase cash is king comes to mind, and this was common knowledge back in those days. And the 90s was when that really started changing. There were very aggressive ad campaigns for credit cards and very, very generous credit card bonuses for opening accounts. There were very generous bonuses for opening accounts in this time. That said, there was a really big shift in consumer behavior and not really enough time to include that in the education system, right? So education policy takes a long time, and this is true with any policy. This is just a ubiquitous issue. But the reason why it's so important with money is because things are moving very quickly in terms of technology and in terms of how we're using currency. Suddenly, more people are using credit cards. More people are getting into debt, but they don't have the proper education to understand what this debt means. A lot of credit card companies tend to target students. And this is the same thought process that goes into getting student loans at a young age, right? So there's not a magic time where your brain goes from being underdeveloped to developed. The 18th birthday does not make a person any more capable of making very large financial decisions. Yet you have people thinking about taking out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans at the same time they're getting introduced into this world of consumer debt. Now, whenever you're a student, and education is also something that's been pushed on, higher education is something that's been pushed on more and more people. Whenever you're a student, you are withholding your cash flow in the present in order to try to get more cash flow in the future. It's a reasonable trade-off, but as soon as you introduce all of this consumer debt on top of the student loan debt, you are looking at a lifetime of debt repayment. And that's what a lot of millennials are experiencing now. So you have this factor of increasing technology, of larger amount of people going into higher education with the hopes of getting a degree and not having the full preparation to know what taking on this debt means. Finally, the other factor that comes into where we are, how do we get to this point, is once we got to the early 2000s leading into the 2010s, we started to see a lot of startups offering these very innovative solutions to paying for things, such as everyone has a debit card now, right? So checking accounts went from being something that you would write down and you would hand balance. Suddenly you have online banking, you have a debit card, and there's all kinds of things that go into that, like consumer fraud, all of that fun stuff. And now leading into the late 2010s, early 2020s, we have buy now, pay later. And that's a whole other fun conversation that I love to talk about, but I probably don't have time to talk about right now. So there's this really, really, really rich history of how we got to where we are now. And like I said, education policy doesn't move that quickly. So we went from having this world where if you had cash, cash was king, you'd be capable of navigating everything that you needed, to suddenly having to know what a checking account is, a savings account. And this does not even include things on the investment side. This is literally just day-to-day spending. So it's absolutely insane how much different things have been in the last 30 years. So even if you have a person who is considered financially literate, who got their education, let's say in the 1980s, like my mother, she went through high school in the 1980s. The world's a lot different than it was back in the 80s. It moves at such a breakneck speed. And while some people are capable of adapting to new systems, you just sometimes get lost in the process whenever you're trying to educate your children about it. So financial literacy is more than just why aren't we teaching this at school? Why aren't we teaching this at home? Sometimes parents are taking the initiative to teach their children, but the world is so different that what they learned when they were kids is not the same as what kids need to know now. And it's not something that you actively think about, like, how does the world change and how do I need to introduce my children to this? So that was a very long-winded summary of the changes that we've gone through, but it's really relevant because if you are living in survival mode, right? Like, let's say that you are in poverty, that you are 3 in 4 Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, you really don't have time to think about all of this stuff. You really are just trying to make it through one day to the next, wondering how you're going to do it. And it's really hard to take a proactive approach whenever you are in this position.
So many great points here. Oh my gosh, I feel like I have a million questions for you. I feel like I could talk to you forever. And I love that I could just feel your passion for this topic through your voice. And so many important points here and so, so interesting. So, yeah, so true that people that are living paycheck to paycheck, they are, like you said, in survival mode. So there's no proactive approach. And it feels like this hamster wheel that they can't get out of. That's so, so difficult. And when you're working 2 to 3 jobs like so many people are. I mean, again, I work in a middle school and high school, and the parking lot is full of cars with Uber and Lyft stickers on them. And these are full-time employed teachers, right? So when people are working, multiple jobs, how could they get the financial literacy and take steps to better their financial situation when people are in survival mode? That's not even where your mind is, and not even to consider the immense stress that poverty and living paycheck to paycheck puts on us. I mean, financial stress is so invasive, it's so insidious. So I'm wondering if you can explain the connection that you've observed between mental health and poverty or living paycheck to paycheck.
Absolutely. So I am obviously not the mental health specialist. That would be you, but I am more than happy to share what I've seen. As a young adult, I'm a member of Gen Z, and we are known as the very sad and nihilistic generation, but also what I've experienced in my training to eventually become a full-time financial professional once I leave my graduate studies. So there are very clear links to the amount of stress that you're experiencing, and it does impact your decision making. So from a financial perspective, in my opinion, all money really is a tool in order to make decisions. So whenever your ability to make decisions is impaired by lack of resources, and time does include a resource. We've all heard that axiom, time is money. And there's this recent trend going around about time management being energy management. So time equals money equals energy. Whenever we don't have much energy, we have less of an ability to make money. Whenever we don't have time, we have less of an ability to make money. Whenever we don't have money, we have less time to do things because we have more time that we're trying to save money or scrimp. For example, people who have the luxury these days because dining out is very expensive. People who have the luxury of dining out don't have to worry about prepping their recipe, thinking about meal planning, having to make the food, having to store the food after you're done with it. Because if you are a person who does not have a family, you probably are going to make more servings than you need in one sitting. And then you also have to worry about doing the dishes, right? So I am a person who does intermittent fasting every little bit, and sometimes I will do up to a 22-hour fast. On the days that I have those longer fasts, I have an extra 3 to 4 hours that's not involving prepping food and eating food and making food. So it's just really crazy how whenever you think about things from a visceral level, we're thinking about survival. We're not even talking about the luxuries like getting to have fun, even watching a movie. We're talking about making food. People who have the luxury of dining out also have the luxury of having extra time. Back to my intermittent fasting example, that's a very severe example. That's probably not relatable for a lot of people. But if we're thinking about the average sit down meal at home versus the average dining out meal, you're probably shaving off 2 to 3 hours a day if you have the luxury to go out and get a lunch on weekdays and take home leftovers. It's Absolutely crazy. And that time is something that you can use to pursue higher income, whether or not that be taking on more working hours, like in those side hustles, those gigs we're talking about with the Uber and Lyft stickers, or talking about pursuing higher education, like getting another degree, getting a higher degree, or a certificate that will allow you to gain new skills. So it's really not as easy to talk about financial decision making unless you're talking about all of those caveats that go into things when time equals energy equals money, and these three things are very much interchangeable. Like everything else in the real world, there is a little bit of friction. I think that our basic physics classes teach us that we lose efficiency whenever we roll a ball across the floor. And I think that that financial decision making is the same way. So we can't really say time equals energy equals money, but we can see it like a ball rolling across the floor. People who have more time have more energy, and so they likely will have more money. And it's this self-fulfilling prophecy that goes into a circle. It creates either a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop. And going back to, we were talking about generational poverty a lot, especially with middle schoolers and high schoolers. If you are born into this system where you are in a negative feedback loop, let's say that your parents are working 3 to 5 jobs between the two of them to make ends meet, and you're expected to work a job while you're still going through high school. It creates a situation where maybe you're not going to get into as good of a college because you don't have the extracurricular activities because you were working a job when you were in high school. Maybe you don't have time to put things into an essay. You don't even have time to think about a career because you are just expecting to work full time at the job that you've already started. It is insane when we think about that. And that said, I think that it's really important to have this teaching moment. This is what is called behavioral economics. In traditional economics, it's assumed that everyone is what is quote unquote a rational actor. There's a lot of different definitions from a lot of very intelligent, much smarter economists than I am as a student. But rational actor in general is someone who's maximizing the amount of income that they have in a given life. So, what we see whenever we are looking at things from a behavioral economic perspective is no, people are not always rational, and there's a multitude of reasons for this. I think, do not quote me on this, but there's over 72 logical fallacies that go directly into behavioral decision making when it comes to money. And a lot of these do stem from that mindset of being in survival or being born into a negative feedback loop, and then the assumptions that go alongside that. We aren't all born into equal situations, and our minds are optimized for different situations. So if you're optimizing for career success, then you're going to be thinking differently than someone who's optimizing for having food on the table for the next meal. And there is this concept in economics called a poverty trap, where sometimes things get so bad that no matter how hard you're pushing to make things better, it will get worse. Poverty traps are very difficult to get out of. They happen a lot in third world countries, but unfortunately, in the United States, we have these concepts like stagflation, which is inflation in combination with a stagnant job market where people are not making more year over year than inflation. It creates situations where poverty traps are a very real reality for a huge proportion of Americans today.
This is such great information, and there's so many points here. So, yes, going back to just the restaurant, like eating out, and yeah, even tonight, my partner and I, we wanted to go out to dinner, and I was looking at menus, and the prices are insane. And it's just the two of us, and we typically, again, only to save money, we only order a meal. That's not even including like a drink, an appetizer, dessert, and the prices are just outrageous just for the two of us. So that's something that it's really stressful to want to be able to go out and to not cook and again, like you said, to use so much time to meal prep. And a lot of people, if they don't have that time to meal prep, they do eat out or they get whatever's cheaper is fast food. So I feel like that's another cycle of eating so unhealthy because it's the cheapest thing that's available. And so that's a struggle. And then also what you said is also the like the cooking and the doing the dishes and all that. Like I'm big on automating, but a lot of automating is very expensive, right? So like different things like getting a crock pot is helpful, but not everybody could afford a crock pot or an instant pot or whatever the case may be. And I love, love, love my Roomba. I think that's so helpful. Like I don't have to vacuum all the time, but that was such a splurge. It was like $300. And I know that they're getting cheaper now, but who can just afford that if you're living paycheck to paycheck? And there's ones that there's like mopping. So there's all this technology. Like you mentioned, the technology changes a lot too. So there's also this technology that's coming out to help us automate our lives, help us to make our lives easier. But for who? Somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck can't afford to automate their lives at all.
Exactly. Yeah. And I really want to conceptualize a little bit more too. Some people can't even afford dishwashers. They can't even afford garbage disposals, right? So if we have people who live in homes that are older, that weren't built with these wonderful automations that started happening, oh my gosh, 50 years ago. Some people don't even have dishwashers. It's crazy to think about whenever we're living day to day and we have access to these luxuries, but they truly are luxuries. I think that if we even expand our look outward, we're talking a lot about people in the US. There are a lot of things, like even a washer and dryer, that some people in other countries don't have access to on a regular basis. So, yes, automation is a huge part of this. And we take for granted a lot what we already have automated, but in part, it's because we're exhausted in other functions. I really think that if we're talking about mental health, money, and exhaustion, we definitely need to talk about the shift in worker behavior, what's expected in the workplace. Because fundamentally, holding all things equal in the conversation, there's a lot of different factors that go into things, as always with economics. But just to break it down as basic as possible, we're working and getting paid for the same amount of hours on paper. But now that we can take our laptops home and we have access to a little computer in our hands, our phone, we're expected to pick up phone calls and emails all the time. This is not true in places outside of the United States. Specifically, I think of Europe and their focus on work-life balance, taking vacations more often, not responding to phone calls outside of working hours. But in the US, there's this focus on constantly being available whenever you're home, trying to spend time with your family, whenever you're on vacation. And I think that that really drives home this idea of time equals money. Because if we're never able to truly unplug from our work and we're constantly expected to be working, whether or not that's at our traditional job, whether or not we're expected to be taking a side hustle or to build that business that everyone's been dreaming of, I think that that's really important to think about. And perhaps for someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, as difficult as it is to feel like you might be giving up that potential income gain by working those extra hours, I think that the first step to getting out of the cycle is actually to set those boundaries and turn the phone off for a little bit, right? Because marginally, the benefit of working, let's say that you do a contracting job, sometimes you make as low as $4 and $5 an hour. It's insane because whenever you're an independent contractor, you don't have to be paid minimum wage. You have to think about things. Is this $4 to $5 an hour worth it for me to keep working? Or should I instead take a little bit of time to rest, to regroup, so that I can be in a position where I can make better decisions? Now, it's much easier said than done because if you are living paycheck to paycheck, maybe you actually do need to make those extra $5. Those extra $5 are the difference between the bills being paid or not. But I think it's important to start asking yourself those questions to see where it is possible. Another thing is when we're looking at productivity and time management and going back to all of this stuff, how much are you trying to escape? Because if you are working one of those side gigs, side hustles, trying to build a business on the side, and you have these quote unquote working hours, but you're scrolling on your phone and acting like a zombie, maybe having that rest time is the best thing for you because you might be more productive if you work a little bit less. These are the tenets that are being talked about a lot in the 4-hour work week, and it's part of that movement to make the work week 4 days instead of five, taking into consideration that a lot of people are doing a lot of unpaid labor at home, especially after the pandemic. There's so many factors that go into it. But I do think that that burnout is a summary of what I'm talking about. And it's huge when it comes to productivity and income potential.
Yes, absolutely. And just going back to something you mentioned before too, again, I work in a middle school and high school. A lot of my students, they would leave school early to go to work.
That goes back to what you said too about kind of those poverty traps and one of my students actually a few years ago dropped out of school, dropped out of high school in I think it was his junior year to work at our local grocery store because he needed to help his mom pay rent. So I just wanted to bring that up because that is a reality that I see, with my own eyes. Something else that you had brought up too is kind of these ideas of those poverty traps. So you did mention a few of them. Are you able to mention a few more just to give people an idea? So, because I think the one that you mentioned, the inflation, prices rising, and stagnant paychecks, salaries, I think that's what a lot of people are struggling with right now. There's a lot of kind of discourse around this right now. It's a very popular topic. I think a lot of people are struggling financially. Rents are going up, groceries are going up, gas is going up, everything is going up, and paychecks are staying the same. So a lot of people are struggling.
A really poignant example of a poverty trap that could happen in, situations that most of your listeners might actually be familiar with, right? Because a lot of times whenever we talk about poverty traps traditionally, like in my classes for economics, we're talking about farmers in a developing country who realize that the price of crops is more expensive than the amount that they're going to make off of those crops. But I think that we can translate that situation really well into a situation we might be familiar with. Let's say that you are in a position where you happen to not be able to find work in your degree that you chose in college. So you have a certain amount of debt that is due every month, the minimum payment, and that's what you can pay. You can't pay anymore, and so you have interest building up on top of that. And it's due because you're after school, and this isn't taking into consideration any forgiveness programs or any suspension programs. Let's say that in 2007, right, you could make, I can't think of, the exact numbers off of the top of my head, but let's say that you can make $7 an hour going to work at a minimum wage job. It takes about 30% of the $7 an hour that you'll make in order to facilitate being there. So, for example, let's say that your travel to get there, including the opportunity cost of taking another job, and the situation where you are away from home and perhaps you need to have someone help mop your floors. Let's say that you're in that position, you're working 7 days a week, and in order to maintain that job, it takes 30% marginally of the dollar that you're making in order to maintain that. So fast forward 20 years. Now it's 2027. And in order to maintain this new job, rather than it taking 30% marginally to keep the job, you're looking at 65% to keep the job marginally because the cost of gas has gotten more expensive. The cost of that cleaner to help you out with your basic tasks has gone up. And then the cost of eating out at your workplace has gone up, and you're working 7 days a week. So you don't have the opportunity to do any of these things on your own. So whenever the marginal benefit of working goes down, so the marginal cost and the marginal benefit are inverse to each other. So in the 2007 example, you're looking at a 70% marginal benefit outside of the cost that it is to facilitate that job. So whenever you are working, say, set for $7 an hour, you're getting 70% of that you can put toward your other bills and debt payments. So you have more money that you benefit from that job. Whenever you're looking at a marginal cost of 65% in 2027, the marginal benefit goes down to 35%. So you're in a situation where you might actually be less well off going to work versus taking the situations like staying at home and not working. Because let's say that you make just enough working your minimum wage job 7 days a week that you no longer qualify for aid. And so the marginal benefit of taking this job in combination with the benefits that you're losing, that opportunity cost that I talked about, puts you in a less well-off position than you were before. That's, I think, a good example of a modern poverty trap that takes into consideration the amenities that we have and what some of the considerations that you would have to make if you are, for example, working 7 days a week. Now, I recognize that this is not a typical situation. There are usually social safety nets that someone can lean on. And usually you have a few days off that you can do some of that household work. But this is just one example of how that could happen in modern day America.
That is such a good example. I'm so glad that you shared that. And just to share my own little personal experience, so I just moved to a different state. I moved from Colorado to Washington State. So I was applying for jobs, and all the jobs I was applying for were huge pay cuts from the job that I had in Colorado. So I did end up getting a job. It starts in a few weeks. And it's a big pay cut, and it's almost an hour drive. And the gas here is much more expensive than it was in Colorado. So it's going to be an additional cost of gas and an additional cost of my time. It's going to be almost 2 hours a day commuting to this job. Just that's even just an example for me moving to a different state, whereas like our rent is lower, but I'm going to be getting paid a lot less than I was before. So I think a lot of people can kind of resonate with your example as well. And I've been seeing a lot of people saying that the same thing I'm experiencing, that they're applying for jobs and they're paying so much less. So I think, again, people are making a lot less as well and having to commute.
Yeah, yeah. And just to build off of what you just said with the job application part, entry-level jobs are no longer actually entry-level jobs anymore. I really feel like these days the word entry-level job is non-existent, right? Because most entry-level jobs, they pay at the entry level, but they expect you to have mid-level experience. They expect you to have 5 years of experience. It's where does this experience come from? I've been very lucky in the sense that I started working at such a young age. I did that by choice, but the fact that retroactively it's now a requirement, that's a little bit dystopian to me. That's a little dystopian to me that I needed to start a business at the age of 17 in order to have the amount of experience required to get an entry-level job. Now, this is different across different fields, but it's just a trend that's especially relevant for me as Gen Z and for my husband, who had to submit over 1,200 job applications before he did find his job.
No, that is such a great point, and that is so true. And I think that's something that a lot of people are talking about as well. And now I know that there's even different kind of state laws coming out that are requiring job postings to post the salary because a lot of them don't. And they are a lot of those entry level salaries. So I think that's helpful too. Even just talking about it and having that kind of salary transparency, I think this is really helpful. And so we've talked a lot about kind of the issues, the poverty traps, and a lot of different things and a lot of different ways that people can struggle. But I'd love to kind of shift gears and kind of talk about what can people do? What are actionable steps that we can take to enhance our financial literacy? And I guess my question for you is before we get into all of that, what role do you think financial education plays in overcoming poverty and benefiting our financial situation?
Absolutely. So I will answer the latter question first, the role of financial literacy. And I think that really just goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, that it is the equalizer. So people who may have been born into situations where, like the student that you mentioned, he had to drop out of school in order to work at a young age, requiring financial literacy before that dropout age might give him the financial foundation that he needs to plant a seed so that perhaps when he's 21 or 22 years old and he can save a little bit of extra money, he might have a better outcome because he got that education before life got too hard and time got in the way and work got in the way. So I think that that is the role of mandatory financial literacy. I'm very passionate about that. I am looking for ways to advocate for that at the national level. It's very important to me. I feel like it should be taught starting in eighth grade, the same way that we teach the Constitution. For me, I think that being a good citizen is learning how to vote, learning how we play our roles in society, but also learning how economically and financially we play those roles. Our unalienable rights are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I think that economic education and the ability to make decisions obviously has to do with living, right? We need to spend money in order to live. And the pursuit of happiness as well. There's a lot of debate around what the founding fathers meant with pursuit of happiness. But from an economic perspective, I think that the ability to pursue the things that we not only need, but also want are part of what make us Americans. And it should be the civic duty of adults to teach children how to function in the society. That is completely an opinion of mine. It's not something that I have necessarily been hammered into. It's not like my classes are telling me this. This is something that I've just developed on my own, and I think it's really important to teach kids in that sense. But I think that financial literacy, it's going to be a long journey to get it mandated, and I am attempting to tackle that right now. I recently moved to Washington, D.C. I am hoping to pursue higher education that will make me that subject matter expert and hopefully get my foot in the door to talk to the policymakers who can make this a thing and explain to them why it's so important. And that is a long-term strategy for sure. But in the short term, right, I think that it's a lot of self-education and taking the next step. Learn what you don't know so that you can learn what some different paths are an option. That's going to be the next step for individuals who find themselves in austere, unlucky, I don't even know how to say it, in a non-disrespectful way, because fundamentally, I do not think that the vast majority of people choose poverty. If you find yourself in the situation and you didn't choose to be there, it's not a result of your own life choices. It's because you were born and you were in a situation where you weren't able to overcome, because not everyone can overcome their situation. I really think that self-education is the first step. Now, moving on to actionable steps, right? If you find yourself in a poverty trap, the first step is to get out of that poverty trap and to find out what resources are available. Even though the United States is not a socialist country, we do operate under a capitalistic society. There are still programs, both private and public, that are available to help people who are in these situations, because the United States fundamentally does try to prevent its citizens from being in subpar situations, which I think that as far as social welfare systems, that should be the baseline. We want to prevent people from being in poverty traps. And that should, to me, is one of the only justifiable reasons for welfare. There's public programs and private programs. They are different state to state, and finding those programs to help get you out of the situations are a viable first step. Now, for people who aren't necessarily in a poverty trap yet, but find themselves getting close to one, mental health is the really important first step. You need to have a strong mind in order to make those strong decisions. It's the similar situation to being in an airplane that is crashing. You need to put on your oxygen mask before you help other people. So in order to provide for yourself and perhaps your spouse or your family members, you have to have that really strong mindset, and mental health is the first step with that. Finding resources for mental health, whether or not that be counseling, if you can't afford counseling, even going online and learning more. Diving into your money story and perhaps some generational trauma around money is going to be really important. So that's a really good first step. And once you find yourself out of the initial emergency, finding financial education content is really important. And this is a big reason why a lot of people get trapped even worse, because whenever you are not mentally in a position to seek out information, it's very easy to be scammed, right? Most of the time, the vast majority of people do not fall for scams. We, across socioeconomic backgrounds, tend to be rational in this sense. However, if you are financially strapped, you might make some irrational decisions because your mental state is not where it needs to be. So that's why I recommend the mental health before seeking out financial education content. There's a wealth of resources. These resources helped me go from being a clueless teenager to being a full-time business owner, and I became very prosperous from a lot of financial education. But there's also a lot of people who want to take your money and want to give you a subpar education or a subpar product or service and sell you on a get rich quick scheme. So I think the three steps that I could sum up for people who are in these situations is: step one, get resources to get out of the poverty trap. It doesn't matter. There's no shame in getting out of a poverty trap. Step two is getting yourself as mentally well as you can possibly be given your financial situation. And once you have those two foundations, once you have the resources to avoid, not having heat or not having electricity, and then you are no longer in a situation where you're spiraling, then you can start to find some financial education content to fill those gaps that you might have had when you were a child or an adolescent.
These are really great tips. So important. I'm wondering, are there any key financial literacy concepts that you believe that people should be specifically looking into or that are important to understand?
Yes, there are four pillars of financial literacy. There is earning money, your ability to earn money, meaning increase the wealth of your household across the lifetime of your household and in the current moment. There's the concept of spending money, learning how to spend responsibly, how to avoid debt. There's also investing, which is different from earning in the sense that investing allows you to leverage a little bit, right? And so for most people, that's going to be their retirement plans, but also learning what opportunities to invest are available for you given your current situation. And finally, protecting, and this is the boring one, that risk management. So making sure that you have a life insurance policy. I'm not a life insurance agent, but I do think that it's really important if you are not independently wealthy to have a way to provide for your family after you pass away, making sure that you're protected in the event of an emergency or an accident. And finally, just having a savings account to prevent the worst case scenario. So there's a lot of things that go into it. Not all of them are fun. I would argue that real financial literacy is very boring. You can have fun talking about it by sharing stories. That's the approach that I have with my financial literacy advocacy. But the material itself is pretty boring. That's why I think so many people fall into the trap of get rich quick schemes and with scams. Because if it sounds interesting and engaging and fun, you're probably going to gravitate toward that versus something that's boring, like save a certain percentage of your money once you get established, put it every little bit in your investment portfolio. It's not that it's easy. We talked about all the factors that can make obtaining a financial education difficult, and maintaining those habits are even more difficult when you get into the behavior economics side, but it's boring. It's so boring whenever you get into the weeds of it. I think that the fun part for me and why I'm so passionate is the outcomes and the stories are what make it fun.
Oh, I love that. I love that you shared those four pillars. I think those are really, really important, really great for people to know so that they could kind of break it down. And I think, like you said, just looking at your own financial situation, I think because the finances cause so much stress and anxiety that a lot of people are avoidant of looking at their financial situation. And I think it's important to really sit down, look at the income, look at the expenses, look at the money coming in, look at the money going out. And I think that people really tend to avoid that because it just causes so many feelings and not only that anxiety, but maybe that shame as well. So I think that probably one of the first steps I would think is to really get an idea of your own financial situation, which is really hard to do.
Exactly. And going back to that situation with trauma, that's, I think, really why mental health is so important when it comes to managing money. And I'm so happy that there are people who are trauma informed like you who know the caveats of mental health and can help people navigate those situations. Now, for very unique situations, perhaps that a financial professional and a counselor or social worker can't address on their own. There are also financial counselors who specialize in those unique situations where additional assistance is needed. And that's where a financial professional or counselor has taken on additional training and steps to get a financial counselor designation. And it marries the two topics very well.
That is great to know, and that's great for people to look into. Aaliyah, this has been such a great conversation, such an important one, and I think that people are really going to take a lot of value from it and find a lot of helpful things in this conversation that could help their financial situation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I would love if you could share where everyone can find you.
Absolutely. So all of the links will be in the show notes. I have a website. It is aaliyahkissick.com where I talk more about financial literacy and share some really impactful information. I'm also the founder and CEO of the Financial Literacy Diaries, which is some of that free online education. I'm very passionate specifically about helping young students who are about to enter adulthood navigate that crazy path by providing free and accessible online information that is vetted by experts and also conversational. Whenever I said that I focus on narratives and stories, that's a big reason why I created the Financial Literacy Diaries. The content itself may not be the most interesting, but it's the stories and the people who invigorate it. Finally, I do have some social media handles that we can include in the show notes, and that is pretty much it.
All right, great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I know everybody is going to want to go check all of that out. I am as well. So, so important to have those resources. Again, Aaliyah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and being here and sharing your expertise.
Thank you for what you do as well for students.
I really hope that you liked this episode and gained a lot of value from it. If you did like this episode, please share it on social media. You can tag me at The Wellness Project with Des on Instagram and at According to Des on Facebook. If you do enjoy my podcast and gain value from it, I would greatly appreciate your support. You can show your love and support by buying me a coffee. This will help my podcast to grow and in turn will help me to keep bringing on amazing guests. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/The Wellness Project with Des to show your support. All books written by or recommended by my amazing podcast guests are listed on my Amazon storefront. Go to the link in the show notes to check out those books. I would love to extend an invite to you to become a part of my community. You can do this through Facebook, where we will be discussing this episode. I would love for you to share your insights, any aha moments, any thoughts or ideas you would like to contribute. You can contribute in the discussion taking place in my Facebook group, and it's a great place to connect with me because I am in there every day with mental health and wellness content, discussions, reflections, journal prompts. It's a fun and supportive place to be. You can find the group at facebook.com/groups/According to Des, and that link will also be in the show notes. You can also check out more of what I'm doing on my website, accordingtodes.com. You'll find a lot of wellness blogs, written interviews, detailed podcast show notes, and my shop, where you will be able to find workshops, my self-care course, digital downloads, ebooks. There's a lot going on my website, so make sure you check that out at accordingtodes.com. And while you're there, join my email list to stay in the know about what I have going on and available for you. When you sign up, you will get your free ebook, The 5 Stress Reduction Techniques to help you feel more relaxed. Thank you so much for being here. I will talk to you next week. So until then, I hope you have a calm and peaceful week.